Thank you. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ruth Cadbury to give this year's Salter Lecture. Ruth is the Labour Member of Parliament for Brentford and Isleworth, but there's no need for me to tell you about her background and how she came to be an MP, because she'll tell her personal story as part of the lecture. However, it is interesting when considering the topic of Ruth's talk to look back to the previous century and recall what Alfred Salter experienced as an MP between 1922 and 1945. Of course, it's hardly surprising that a Quaker, believing in truth as a fundamental principle, might have problems in public life. Alfred was a strong teetotaler, and on one famous occasion, he denounced his fellow MPs for being drunk during House of Commons debates. He wanted the bars in Parliament to be closed down on the grounds that no other workplace allowed drinking on the premises. Many members were furious, and he was accused of, quote, a gross libel upon the members of the House and a gross breach of its privileges, end of quote. But Alfred refused to apologise, and although he was found guilty, no punishment was imposed. One well-respected member wrote to him afterwards to say, "You have done a mighty service by saying what everyone knows to be true and sticking to it." Ruth Cadbury was one of the first parliamentarians to become involved in the current discussion of truth and integrity in public life. We look forward very much to hearing her latest thoughts on the topic. As usual with these events, we will begin with a short Quaker silence, and Ruth will start speaking when she is ready.
Thank you, Sheila, and I'm delighted as both a Quaker and an elected Labour MP to be presenting the Salter Lecture 2022. So in this lecture today, I want to, for the Quaker perspective on truth and integrity, briefly describe my journey and give a perspective on truth and integrity in British politics over time and now, both the blatant lying, but also the grey area. I end with some suggestions about what we can do about this, but I hope that we can use the time at the end to hear your suggestions very briefly. So I'd like to thank several people as I start, who've helped me with ideas and editing this lecture. Two of my constituents, one is the journalist Peter Oborne, the other is my friend and fellow member of Brentford and Isleworth Quaker Meeting, Bernadette O'Shea. I'd also like to thank Quaker MP and my husband, Nick. So firstly, the Quaker perspective. For Quakers, truth and integrity are absolutely core to how we live our lives, and Friends have long been recognised for these strengths by others. In Faith and Practice, I found this quote: "From the earliest days, Quakers were known for speaking truth as they experienced it inwardly in their meetings for worship. They didn't make a distinction between belief and action." Quote, "Truth was almost more of a verb than a noun. It was something which you did as you experienced it," unquote. Our core values are, of course, set out in Advices and Queries. Number 37 says, "Are you honest and truthful in all you say and do? Do you maintain strict integrity in business transactions and in your dealings with individuals and organisations? Do you use money and information entrusted to you with discretion and responsibility? Taking oaths implies a double standard of truth. In choosing to affirm instead, be aware of the claim to integrity that you're making." And in respect to politics, number 34 says, "Remember your responsibilities as a citizen for the conduct of local, national and international affairs. Do not shrink from the time and effort your involvement may demand." For generations, Quakers have been involved in public life as campaigners, agents for social change, politicians, and as exemplars of best in business. Some have been, and as I say, are elected politicians. And currently there are 2 of us in the House of Commons. Now, I thought this was an underrepresentation, and then I did the maths. So Catherine West and I represent 0.3% of the Commons membership, 10 times more than the proportion of Quaker members and attenders in Britain's population. I hope I've got the maths right, but I'm happy for them to be corrected in the Q&A or on the chat if I've got that wrong. Now, I first started really considering this topic when in 2021, Meeting of Friends in Wales met me and others with political roles as part of the work they were doing on their concern about truth and integrity. And this has since developed across BYM, and the Quaker Truth and Integrity Group is now an accredited Quaker recognised body. They held a conference in the last week of April, whose very powerful concluding statement is called Living Truth, a Rallying Call for Quakers. And I've linked here to the final conference statement in my text. So I'm just checking the chat that people can hear me. I'll try and speak slowly then. Okay. Right. Now, I realise many here tonight will have been active with the Truth and Integrity Group, so my apologies if I cover the same ground, no doubt in a lot less depth than in your recent conference. So my journey as a Labour MP, there are many Quakers elected to public office in Britain and probably disproportionate to our numbers in the UK. The Quaker Socialist Society asked me to speak today, I think, because I'm one of only 2 MPs in the Commons, so I will start with my route to get there. When I meet groups of school and college students, they always ask, how did you become an MP? Or how could I become an MP? And I tell them there is no one way to get selected and then elected as an MP. Like many careers, some people achieve the dream that they've had from a young age. And for others, like me, it's more an unplanned journey. I was 53 before I even considered that I might want to sit on the green benches. As you'll guess from my name, I was born into a family that had used the wealth my forebears created in business to not only provide for decent working and living conditions for its employees, but also to address social change by funding campaigns, legal challenges, and even political parties. I went to meeting most weeks, as both my parents were Quakers. As a teenager, I went to junior yearly meeting and later young friends weekends. And part of my schooling was at a Quaker school, the Mount in York. I had a privileged childhood in all ways, but I also grew up steeped in the values of social justice, peace, and reconciliation, and an understanding of the destructive impacts of poverty and inequality. And also that challenge of the status quo is normal and that change is possible. I'm still, and will always be, a member of the Society of Friends, although I would be the first to admit I'm hardly a regular at meeting for worship. And on the other hand, my political life started when I was at university at Salford, where I joined the Labour Party and was elected Vice President of the Students' Union the year after my graduation in 1981. And that coincided with Salford being placed at the top of Margaret Thatcher's list of university cuts. So I was then at the forefront of our campaign against the cuts, and that brought me onto the national stage in student politics terms. And that led to a year on the National Union of Students National Executive, and finding myself in 1984 moving to Brentford in West London, where I've lived ever since, and in the constituency which I now represent in Parliament. No, I apologise if people can't hear me. There's not a lot I can do. But I'll power on, and if people can't hear me, the text and the recording will be available. So, as I said, people's route into elected politics and becoming MPs, as with many people's life journeys, are often as a result of a series of coincidences, and certainly mine was, happening to be in the right or maybe the wrong place at the right time. For me, 6 years in Salford with a bit of studying and quite a lot of student politics meant I had some political experience and was interested in community activity. I pursued these in my professional life, working first for a community association and later as a planner, a town planner. In the political world, my skills were recognised by other party members who encouraged me to be the local Labour Party branch secretary, and then not long after to stand as a candidate for the 1986 council elections for our safe Labour ward. So I hadn't started out with any ambition to be a councillor, but once elected, I served on Hounslow Council for 25 years, with senior roles at various times, including the deputy leader, chair of planning, and as a cabinet member for variously housing, regeneration, and education, as well as being active in the local Labour Party. I can point to council's decisions that I'm particularly proud of persuading my colleagues to support, such as signing the council up being an accredited living wage employer, investing taxpayers' money in opposing Heathrow expansion, keeping Brentford Football Club in Brentford. Our constituency, Brentford and Isleworth, was lost to the Conservatives in the 2010 general election. We needed a Labour candidate for the 2015 election. I'd always been happy as a councillor and felt able to make a difference because we were in power. And I also enjoyed my work as a town planner. So I needed some persuasion to put my hat in the ring for the selection. Then I felt that I now had a bit of experience that I could bring to the role of MP. So I sought selection among Labour Party members locally and was then elected just over 7 years ago now. During my time as an opposition MP, I've served on cross-party select committees and on 3 front teams as a junior shadow minister. That's the level below the shadow cabinet. It's less easy to point to achievements when one is in parliamentary opposition, although ministers have acknowledged to me that issues I've raised have been helpful. And I have managed to help constituents with problems, but not nearly enough because, again, so many are the result of the government's policies on income levels and benefits or their immigration policies. So now move on to a history of truth and integrity in British politics. Before the emergence of political parties as we now know them, Peter Oborne says it was normal for ministers to lie, cheat and bribe and pay famous writers to undermine their opponents. Until about the start of the 19th century, ministers made huge personal fortunes from corruption, something we see in failing democracies around the world today. There was then limited accountability on how money was spent. And there's the famous Ambrose Bierce description of politics of the period as being, I quote, the conduct of public affairs for private advantage. Morality in public life changed with our Victorian ancestors, many of whom were religious Christians with a strong moral code, introduced accountability and integrity and a series of actions against deceit and corruption. Their system was based on the rule of law with the pillars of parliament, judiciary, impartial civil service and a free press. And it's fair to say that for almost 200 years, these pillars were doing a pretty good job of preventing liars, cheats and fascists from stealing power. Now, this is not to say there weren't significant examples of MPs and prime ministers who lied or lacked integrity. And it could be said they got away with more than they would do now due to a greater level of difference, far less ability for deep, in real time, public scrutiny. David Lloyd George, who established the modern welfare state by introducing national insurance, welfare benefits, the first mass council house building programme, extending the franchise to all men and women, was not without his faults. He was embroiled in a cash for peerages scandal to raise party funds. And of course, he was by no means the last prime minister to be accused of doing so. In 1963, John Profumo lied to Parliament about his affair with Christine Keeler, although he later at least admitted he had deceived the House, and he resigned, quote, with deep remorse. And then it was John Major's government. There was the Cash for Questions affair. That led to a key addition to the governance of public life. In 1995, he set up a committee chaired by Lord Nolan, now named the Committee on Standards in Public Life. The CSPL is an advisory, non-departmental public body of the UK government that developed and promotes the 7 principles of public life, which have become known as the Nolan Principles. The 7 Nolan Principles are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. They're enshrined in codes of conduct used across the UK public sector that every councillor and MP is required to sign up at the start of their period of office, and against which their actions, behaviours, and decisions are judged. They also apply to senior public employees as well. Having them makes it easy for an organisation to judge a breach using their own code of conduct and processes. And I would say, as a core statement of integrity, they have served our public sector well over the last 30 years since they were formulated. And because most public servants, elected and appointed, want to serve the public, they have no problem complying with the 7 principles, probably because they are integral to their own values and priorities. In my local government and my parliamentary experience, I would say that almost everyone who goes into politics in the UK does so to make their community, this country, and the world a better place. Furthermore, most politicians are not liars. Nearly everyone I've got to know in Parliament and before that in local government has similar core values. And of course, we differ on the outcomes, the solutions, because this is what leads us to be in different political parties, or in the case of many parish and some borough councillors, those who choose to have no party allegiance. And I also suspect elected politicians have a higher than average level of religious observance, but this is based on merely on my own anecdotal experience, because it was when I worked on the Local Government Association's Leadership Academy and we chatted in the breaks about our personal lives, I was surprised just how many of these busy councillors on those courses were also religious and active worshippers in all world faiths. So I then move on to question whether has the core structure of our democracy been weakened irreparably in the UK in the last 2.5 years. And certainly the final conference statement from April's Quaker Truth and Integrity Group conference feels quite pessimistic, saying, quote, standards of truthfulness and integrity in public and commercial life are being undermined to the extent that democracy itself is under threat, unquote. That's a strong statement. I would say the foundations of our democracy are still there and at many levels still operating and largely effective. However, I do feel, I think many people here in this country do feel that they are being seriously undermined by the current minister. Boris Johnson's behaviour as Prime Minister is well described in Peter Oborne's book published in February last year, The Assault on Truth, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump and the Emergence of a New Moral Barbarism. Boris Johnson's lies, the ones on public record, are catalogued on Peter's website, borisjohnsonlies.com. Peter identified 50 lies by the Minister in Parliament alone between 2019 election and January this year, many more statements, speeches and interviews. The behaviour has continued since January, even till this April at the end of the closing Parliament, when he couldn't remember that at the time the NHS and the Chief Medical Officer had been telling the government that it is likely that the symptomatic spread of COVID was happening. And he said, we didn't know about that then. He's also struggled with most, if not all, of the rest of the lowland principles at various times, and has consistently showed contempt towards any check or balance on his power, suspending Parliament, expelling MPs in his own party, weakening the power of the judiciary, breaking the lockdown laws he approved, and refusing to follow his own ministerial code of conduct. We perhaps shouldn't be surprised if he struggles with truth and integrity. When he was in Eton as a teenager, his housemaster famously wrote to his parents, "Boris really has adopted a disgracefully cavalier attitude to his classical studies. Boris sometimes seems affronted when criticised for what amounts to a gross failure of responsibility. Surprised at the same time he was not appointed captain of the school for next half. I think he honestly believes that it is churlish for us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation which binds everyone else," unquote. But of course, it's not just about one man. He is the leader of his party, though, and the example he sets filters through. And too many times, senior MPs have been allowed by him to continue in office or been defended by him. T. Patel over bullying and Owen Paterson over lobbying for personal gain. But this behaviour in politics coming from the head of government, and we saw it in the US with Donald Trump, has meant lies and lying is the norm. And I see it on the doorstep. Voters assume we're all liars, which is a gift, of course, to those who are, and it's very difficult for those of us who aren't. However, examples of politicians doing the right thing help to counter that attitude. 2/3 of those polled in last week's opinion poll said Keir Starmer was right to say he would resign if he received a fixed penalty notice. And almost a quarter said it has given them a more favourable view of the leader of the Labour Party. And as I said before, I think most MPs on all sides of the House are honest. But the other main challenge to the strength of our democracy at the moment is our media in all forms. With marketing being all around us every day, politics has been stripped down to simple and oft-repeated three-word phrases that speak to people's emotional side. It's so simple, so there's no room for nuance or complexity. It becomes more difficult for us to engage in political dialogue as feelings become more important than facts. An example for me is one I often experienced during the EU referendum campaign. When I was discussing with people who were planning to vote leave, we weren't meeting anywhere because my position was fact-based, the other person was expressing feelings, which often involved that memorable mantra, take control, meaningless and factually incorrect, incredibly powerful. And of course, this failure in competent leadership matters, not only because of the damage this does to the reputation of government and politicians among voters, but also how the rest of the world views Britain. And it does potentially fundamentally undermine our democracy. Peter Oborne again says, we had an area of public discourse which belonged to everybody, a common ground where rival parties could coexist. Political lying is a form of theft. It takes away people's democratic rights. Voters cannot make fair judgments on the basis of falsehoods, he said. So how has this happened? Partly we have a largely complicit media with an inadequate challenge, hardly surprising because of the threats some face, for example, the funding of the BBC and the future of Channel 4. And then there has been the rise of social media, where lies are repeated in ever-growing echo chambers, over which there's little adequate oversight. These together allow politicians, like the Prime Minister and the former President of the US, to fight their battles against liberal democracy using lies. They can conjure up the will of the people to give them the legitimacy to take on those that challenge them. Elected MPs, the rule of law, civil service, and even their own political parties. And of course, not forgetting those experts. But we also have a constitutional arrangement in Parliament that never envisaged that members of Parliament could or would be dishonourable. Nevertheless, there is a matrix of parliamentary structures whose purpose is to hold us as MPs and parliamentarians to account, along with the disciplinary processes in our political parties. I'll just name a few. The Parliamentary Commissioner of Standards oversees the maintenance and monitors the operation of the Register of Members' Interests. But in the chamber, it's the Speaker who ensures parliamentary rules are followed, and neither Speaker can suspend a member or even the sitting of the House in the case of serious disorder. In theory, if an MP, an honourable member, as we all are, is found to have lied to the House, this requires a vote on whether that was considered to be contempt of the House. That requires the governing party to agree, which effectively means the only arbiter of whether a minister or ordinary member of the House has lied is the Prime Minister. Now, the ministerial code of conduct requires a minister who inadvertently misleads the House to return at the earliest opportunity to set record straight. If they don't, too often happens, there is nothing the Speaker of the House can do. Ministers' behaviour is regulated by the ministerial code, issued and regulated by, as I say, the Prime Minister. And then the problem in monitoring and implementing any code of conduct in politics is that it can't compare with a blunt regulatory instrument with a set of rules which can be kept or broken, such as in the context of an employment. And Dr. Foster Gilbert of the Westminster Abbey Institute pointed out, the challenge is that for MPs faced with difficult choices on a daily basis, the task is to learn how to retain their dignity and behave selflessly, even while making those choices. At the start of every parliamentary day, prayers are said, and those MPs who do go in for prayers and pray that members may never lead the nation wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideals, laying aside all private interests and prejudices, keep in mind their responsibility to seek and improve the condition of all mankind. Apologies for the gendered language, by the way. While the codes of conduct and their infrastructure in Parliament are complex, and when it comes to ministers in particular, they are inherently weak. But I do think they work better in other spheres, such as in local councils. The standards regime is clearer and has far more effective sanctions, as do those that apply to employees in the public sector. And I've said earlier, I believe that the vast majority of people in public life, MPs included, carry out their duties honestly, with integrity. It also seems that the UK public want politicians who are honest and have integrity and operate within the rules, funnily enough, over and above what they believe is important in delivering outcomes. And this is according to a large survey of voters carried out by the Constitution Unit at the University of London, University College London. Now, there are recommendations for change. The Committee on Standards has carried out a fundamental review of the rules for MPs and made several recommendations to update the rules around behaviour of MPs, outside interests, lobbying, and the declaration of gifts and hospitality by ministers, as well as strengthening the process for enforcing, adjudicating the rules. Leighton Andrews, who's now Professor of Public Leadership at the Cardiff Business School, but was formerly a Welsh government minister, proposed back in 1921 that there should be a properly resourced staffed Office of Government and Ethics, set up on a statutory basis, reporting to Parliament rather than to the Prime Minister. And the Labour Party leadership has also committed to change. Deputy leader Angela Rayner in November 21 called for a revision to the lobbying and ethics rules in Parliament to include a ban on MPs having consultancy jobs, a proper sanctions regime, and the creation of an Integrity and Ethics Commission to replace several elements of the existing system with more powers. On media, the current online safety bill is an opportunity for better regulation of the online world. So far, the draft currently introduced by government certainly needs more work to ensure that people have security and respect online. Then beyond government and Parliament, some suggest citizens' assemblies can be a useful tool commissioned by Parliament or government and bringing together a representative group of voters to work together on solutions. The Citizens' Assembly model worked well in Ireland, where one was commissioned by the Irish Parliament on abortion law reform, always long been a sticky issue in the Republic of Ireland. The Assembly recommended, somewhat to many people's surprise, a large-scale reform, which was then implemented after a clear majority in the subsequent referendum in 2018. As Parliament had commissioned that Assembly, it could not ignore its recommendations, neither could the government. So far, I've covered truth and integrity in the context of the serious failures of our current Prime Minister and ministers. But I know many voters are concerned about the more universal grey area, not so much politicians outright lying, what appears to me not speaking the whole truth, not answering a straight question with a straight answer on Question Time, Sophie John Skye. And something, as a Quaker, that's maybe why I struggle as well sometimes. Why is it we have this grey area that worries many voters? I go back to why we're in politics. We want to make our country a better place. For me, I believe this is always one led by Labour governments: less poverty and inequality, an effective public sector, support for all in need, facing up to addressing the climate crisis, and supporting an economy that can achieve those other objectives. Clause 1 of Labour Party rules says words to the effect of, "We seek the trust of the people to govern." To win that trust from people who haven't voted Labour last time, but we want to get to vote Labour next, to get over that winning post, we need to have clear, consistent messages. Being part of a team means having collective discipline on those messages. It does in any team. Be involved in the internal development of the policies, understanding them, and then expressing them clearly when and only when they've been agreed. The other challenge the other challenge is that we live in a world of intense scrutiny. A poorly thought through phrase or comment can be blown up to imply something else. Remember Emily Thornberry's white van man tweet. In politics, there's no space for nuance, no space to recognize that there are not easy solutions to every problem. The honest answer to questions about many policies is, quote, "This is an interesting and well-evidenced initiative which I'm putting in place in good faith to address problem X. I can't be certain it will work, but it's worth a try," unquote. One could then be accused of being weak by voters or by the press or the opposition. Expectation is that you must have the answers. To do good in an imperfect world, though, means you have to be in power. That means winning elections, which means building trust with voters, which means making a convincing and consistent case. The whip system is also an integral part to that collective discipline in party-based politics in which I operate. Now, I've not yet had my core values truly tested in a vote on an issue of conscience. My one and only serious rebellion in Parliament was after the Brexit referendum, when I supported an amendment to keep the UK in the single market and the customs union. However, for me, it was an easy decision for me to break the whip. All I lost then was my role as a shadow housing minister. So I come to the end to ask, what can we do? And I welcome your thoughts in the short time we have in the session after I've finished. I start with just a very few. Personally, for personal recommendations, I would say engage with elected politicians. Consider whether they are upholding the 7 Nolan principles, and engage and challenge other politicians to do so. You get involved in politics if you can. If you're supportive of a political party, join that party. And whether you are or not, but consider putting yourself forward for future elections. And of course, do join the Quaker Truth and Integrity group. As Quakers collectively, what can Quakers do? I would say in your local meetings, join in your community, in your local interfaith or churches together group, work together to address tricky local issues. Nationally, same. So, to the end, and in conclusion, I've tried to draw together our Quaker values, my experience as an elected Labour politician and Quaker, Some thoughts about the current challenging situation we have at the heart of government in the UK right now. I've started to suggest some actions that Quakers could consider doing as individuals and as local and as a national faith group that is well respected for truth and integrity, with many members already actively involved in public life. There are almost certainly many ideas and experiences here tonight. So I'd like to conclude my remarks now and hear your thoughts and answer your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ruth, for that lecture. I think so there was a lot of thorough to go through. We don't have a huge amount of time to take questions. I'm just wanting to say I'm sorry about the difficulty that some people have had hearing Ruth. I'm not quite sure why we didn't end up with an on-screen transcript, but as we heard earlier, the full text of a lecture is going to be available online at some point. I'm not sure exactly when. I'm seeing a few hands up. I'm going to call on people if you can unmute yourself, state your question and unmute yourself fairly quickly. We'll take 3 questions and then come back to Ruth to hear them. So can I start with Keith? Keith, we can't hear you. Okay, go for it.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Hello, friends. Hello, Ruth. If I understand correctly, you mentioned several times over the course of the lecture the the controlling effect or moderating effect of political parties on MPs who, let's say, or councillors or wherever it is, who follow a whip. It's certainly true that before there were political parties, we had a very untrammeled executive that was, in many cases, fabulously corrupt. What we have today is many MPs who sit in safe seats. They are beholden to the party apparatus for their job, for their extensive opportunities for personal enrichment, as that hasn't gone away. Can we really look to political parties to help us, or are they not as much part of the apparatus of corruption as any individual moral failings of one MP or politician or not as another?
Thank you, Keith. Grace?
Hello, I'm Public Affairs Manager at Quakers in Britain, and I was wondering if you think that truth and integrity is kind of the central part of democracy that Quakers should be caring most about, or whether you think it's more important for us to be campaigning on the real kind of like legal changes that the government is making to weaken the checks and balances that kind of are the pillars of our democracy.
Thank you, Grace. Neil.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for this very practical political analysis from a Quaker perspective as an MP. My question is this: how toxic is Boris Johnson as an individual, as Prime Minister at the moment, in relationship to dialogue between parties? Is the present situation being driven by an individual, Boris Johnson, or by deeper things going on in the electorate? Reason and truth seems to be being overwhelmed by some sort of atavistic feeling. But what drives that, in your view? Is Boris Johnson driving this, or is he only a puppet reflecting a broader society that wants to become less rational, more atavistic, because it's so challenged by reality? Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for those questions. I can see lots of hands up. Don't hesitate to put your hand up. We might not get through all the questions. Ruth, can I ask you to come back on those 3 questions?
Right, okay. Those are great questions. And I hope I can do well, I will try and do justice to them, but okay. So many MPs sit in safe seats. I think we can show by the elections in 2017 and 2019 that many Labour MPs who probably always thought they did sit in safe seats didn't. And I think now a lot of Conservative MPs are now realising that they may not sit in safe seats after particularly, say, the Amersham by-election and the one that followed Owen Paterson's resignation. So, and certainly I was very much involved in the late during the 90s, at least within the Labour Party nationally, on work to improve how local Labour parties, Labour councillors and MPs actually actively engaged with the electorate, partly because it was the right thing to do. You should never taking for granted your electorate, the people, your constituents, however they voted, because it's honourable, it's the right thing to do. It's how the Labour Party should have been seen to, and too often wasn't, because of lazy behaviour in those parties. But also, to be honest, the writing was on the wall. The Labour vote steadily went down from, I think, 97 onwards until, 2010 didn't happen out of the blue. It was an election after a series of elections where the Labour vote went down. And not 97, 2010, of course. And we knew that if councillors and MPs want to be re-elected, they had to work a bit harder. So, and I think the Conservative members are seeing that as well. And so I don't think they're part of the apparatus of corruption. What concerns me that links to part of Neil's question, I think, is that who is Boris Johnson's audience right now? Is it the electorate or is it members of the Conservative Party? And he was elected out of a electorate of 70,000 people. It's tiny. The members of the Conservative Party, and of course he got 2/3 of that vote against Jeremy Hunt. And then you've got to look at how extreme the decline in membership of the Conservative Party has been, and the sort of many One Nation sort of soft right Conservative Party members have left, and the shift, the dial has moved to the right. So that's to you, the right. It's because of the threat of UKIP and Farage, and so he is. I think he's a product. He's a product of a number of things. I mean, partly himself. He's always wanted to be the Prime Minister, and has never, as his family members will say, and he's never really had a consistent political philosophy, even less, I would say, than David Cameron. But he's also a product, and as was Donald Trump, a product of the rise of that echo chamber of social media I mentioned, and levels of education, which I think we all have to take responsibility for among the electorates, because there's a close correlation with extreme voting behaviours, extreme right-wing voting behaviours, and levels of education in a population. And dialogue between parties. I mean, Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's questions, I think, is the nearest they get to actually talking to each other, and that's hardly a dialogue. So I don't get a sense that he engages with the other parties much. Maybe the DUP when he needed their votes. And now Grace's question, is truth and integrity the central issue? And I thought you were going to say, or should Quakers be also, or more get involved in political issues of, you know, the issues of the day, such as the appalling Immigration Act or climate change. But actually you said, or real changes to weaken, to stop us weakening the checks and balances. And I think the checks and balances and truth and integrity, I think they're all bound up with each other. And as I said, because we haven't got a written constitution, but until now we've operated on the sense in Parliament, we've since been sensed on personal honour, but you know, and that hasn't worked. And the whole Brexit debacle also shows the weakness of lack of a written constitution. So I think there are issues there. I think I hope I've answered those three questions adequately, or at least attempted to.
Excellent, thank you, Ruth. Can we take Zizi's question next?
Thank you. I want to follow up on the question about Boris Johnson. You have been saying that politicians of all types, of all parties, believe in values such as speaking the truth, and yet he manages to get away with openly lying. And why does he not get deselected by his party? And how does he manage to go on getting away with it?
I don't think I said all. I think I said most. I think I said almost all, because quite clearly, I mean, there's so many essays on his behaviour and, you know, examples of his behaviour and what might have led to his behaviour, or what else he does. So, you know, there's so many people, including eminent academics, say that he's almost hardwired to lie. How did he get there? Well, of course, he campaigned to lead the Conservative Party. He led them to the biggest victory they've ever had, which was partly helped by the weakness in our party at the time. We should never have had an election at that. Many of us knew we were in a really weak position. He took Conservative Party to a storming victory, so they're very grateful to him. Why would they deselect him? Now, recent incidents, we're going to see how Partygate and the Sue Gray report will play out, but he's having a hard time within the Conservative Party and among his fellow MPs. So it's a watch this space. I think he's pushed into a corner, but he's the kind of person who's so desperate to remain Prime Minister because that's all he's got, that he'll do anything to stay there and do anything. I mean, not saying he's going to start killing people, but I mean, remember he was taped in a phone conversation that involved helping somebody else to arrange them to beat up a journalist. So, you know, we've got a difficult few months ahead, but the answer to your question lies with the members of the Conservative Party and Conservative MPs, Easy.
Thank you, Ruth. If I can take another round of questions, I think we've got time for maybe one more round. Can I take Stefan Ball next?
Thank you. Mine's a little sideways. It was really something that Sheila Taylor said about Alfred Salter, that he campaigned to try and close the bars in Parliament. And I've heard recent discussions, you know, on the radio and elsewhere about this again, because I think some of the behaviour may stem from drinking. Whatever our views about alcohol, drinking at work, and Parliament is a workplace, may well affect conduct in the Parliament. I don't know your views on that. I'd be interested to hear as a MP. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And I noticed one question in the chat, which was about when is the Electoral Party going to support electoral reform away from first past the post?
Good question.
And then thirdly, if I can take Noel.
I had just one quick question. What do you think about the idea of MPs trooping through open lobbies and voting in public? I know the public are able to hold the MPs to account by that means, but so are the party whips. And if you want to be re-selected to seat as an MP, you need to have the support of your party.
Excellent. Thank you all for those questions. Ruth?
Questions. It is a workplace. It's a very unusual workplace because there's a large number of people there who are away from home from Monday lunchtime till Wednesday evening or Thursday. So although if I'm there late, I'm generally sit in my office trying to catch up on emails and things. But I do drink modestly, but I only ever go to the bar if, you know, and obviously because it's that nature of workplace, if it's somebody's birthday or some reason to, you know, celebrate with it, you know, it's difficult not to. The actual facts, though, there was a recent report, there was something came out this week about drunkenness in Parliament, and it actually turns out that the drunkenness is actually people, and it's often MP staff drinking in offices. Getting drunk away from going out at the end of their working day at 6 o'clock or whenever, going out to the pub or something, and then coming back drunk, and then going to see what they've got in their desks. And that almost all of the incidents by volume of numbers of drunkenness has been that. And obviously I'm not condoning some of the bad behaviour of MPs, and you know, most MPs now, I seldom see drunk MPs late in the evening. I have done, but it's not common, it's not the norm. So I hope that, you know, and there are fewer bars than there used to be. So, and I think generally we have a culture, we do have a work culture that doesn't approve of drunkenness, certainly in our lobbies. But I think actually among many of the Conservative MPs, particularly those who've only arrived in the last 5 years, there's a strong work ethic overall. Proportional representation. This goes to something I said about what I can and can't say, being a front bencher. I've long been an active. Well, you know, I have spoken in favour of proportional representation in Parliament. At the moment, I think it's fair to say the the Labour Party is neutral on the subject. It's not, but is not against moving towards PR. And there are many MPs and party members who strongly want the party to change. Interestingly, trade unions, Unite, the union, the biggest union in the country and affiliate to the Labour Party, is now on the fence when it used to be opposed to PR. And another large union, Unison, is now in favour of PR. So there may be a direction of travel, but I couldn't possibly say any more. Open lobbies, I don't think I'm not aware of a functioning democracy in the world where MPs' votes are not on public record. It's just that we've got a rather unusual and old-fashioned system where we have to troop through a lobby. Most functioning democracies have parliamentarians sitting at desks and they press buttons according to how they're voting, but that is on record. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ruth. I think we have hit our 8:30, so I don't think we'll have time for any more questions. But thank you to everyone who's raised questions. We will have as I said, we'll have a text of a lecture available in the next QSS newsletter. Yeah, are there any final comments from Jill or Sheila?
Can't we take from Caroline and Richard from North Scotland?
I'm sorry, we are out of time. I think
it's a little unfair.
It's very quick.
Yes, be very quick. Yes.
There were several people who had their hands up. Ruth, I think it's up to you whether you've got time, but I know I think you might need to dash
I
off.
was told we only had a 1 hour window technically, but I'm, you know, well, I will be, yeah, my husband is cooking my dinner, so I'll be in trouble if I stay too long with him, but I'm happy to take another couple of questions. It's so long as they're quick and I can answer quickly, I will try.
In that spirit then, I think I've seen Carolyn, and there was another hand that I saw earlier from Martina, so if we can take those two.
Scylla, did you have a question?
Okay, thank you. My question's very quick, turning it to what we should do, talking to our MPs and our elected representatives. Should we put our point of view as strongly as possible, or should we acknowledge that most of the problems that we're trying to get in moving in a more preferable direction, we should acknowledge that there are nuanced and there's no one simple solution? It's very easy when we're lobbying to demand things or state things very strongly when we know that things are difficult.
Well, when you state things strongly, you're presumably speaking from your heart and your conscience. And I don't think you should, you know, refrain from doing that. The reality is, you know, big campaigns such as have been happening over some of the recent bills on immigration and protest and so on. We've managed to get some changes through. We haven't got everything that all the campaigners want. But without the campaigns, we probably wouldn't have got any change. So your passion, your communication with your MPs and being involved in campaign groups helps. So please keep doing it. Can I just also say, if you've got a basically supportive MP on the issue, your own MP, remember, generally we can only respond to our own constituents, and you have to check who your MP is, be quite sure who your MP is. That is, unless you're, you know, doing something through a work capacity. But I really like it when people explain an issue, what it means to them personally. So, such as dignity in dying, people's personal stories, it could be on immigration. But if you tell me if you've got a specific experience that leads you to the view you've got, it really helps me in writing speeches or writing articles, because real life examples illustrate the point so much better than the briefing I get from the campaign group or the Parliamentary Labour Party. Or the change.org or 38 Degrees petition wording.
Great, thank you, Ruth. I'm not seeing any other hands up at this point, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you again, Ruth. Thank you all for attending. It's great to see it's one of the good things about Zoom is that you get a nice easy count, and we've had over 250 people in here today, so nearly 300. So thank you again. If you're interested in the Quaker Socialist Society, please do check out our website. You can find that by Googling Quaker Socialist. I don't have the URL in front of me. And there's also a Facebook page. Yeah, hope to see lots of you involved in QSS activity in the future. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.